So the methodology was developed by a chap called Joe Flanagan, who I've worked with for quite a long time in the public sector. He's still a civil servant. He came up with the options framework because I don't know if you're familiar with the Treasury Green Book at all.
No.
So, I mean, it's just about all it says is that, before you spend public money, you should be able to demonstrate that it's going to deliver value, value for money. So, if you build a school or a hospital or a road, there are options for, where that road goes. Is it one lane? Is it two lanes? Does it go past this town or this town? All of that stuff. It's all very well and good saying we'll just build a road, but you need to examine those options. And the Treasury Green Book says, well, come up with a long list of options, brainstorm. It doesn't really give you any tools to actually come up with that long list, and then from that long list, whittle it down to a short list, and then that's the short list is what you will do some more detailed economic analysis on. So you'll do the number crunching. How much does it cost? What benefits are we going to get from this? What risks are involved, and can we quantify some of those? So what is what they call the net present value of that option? And you then pick the one with the highest net present value, basically. So that's what the Treasury Green Book says. But the reality is, if you just get people in a room and say, "Come on, let's brainstorm a long list. Well, where do we want this road to go?" It's really not a very structured way to do it. So the options framework splits it down into different elements of choice. So the first question is about scope. That's the what, really. When you're looking at what if you want to invest in something, what's covered by that? What's the coverage? Is it a road? Is it all transport? Is it what's contained within the sphere of investment? The second element of choice is the service solution. So that's the how. So how are you actually going to build the road? Are you going to use concrete? Are you going to use tarmac? Maybe that's the choice that you think about at that stage. Depends, really. But the technical solution, if you like. And then there's the next element is the service delivery, which is the who. Who's going to do it? Who's actually going to build the road? Are you going to build it yourself, or are you going to pay somebody else to do it? When are you going to do it? There are options around that. You can do it quickly. You can do it more slowly. That alters affordability. If you do anything is affordable, if you're doing it far enough away in the future. So there are options about when you do it and how you phase the work. And then there are also options about how you pay for it. So you might pay for the road using public capital. You might pay for the road using a PFI type deal, where you borrow the money and buy a service from the private sector. And there are probably other models of funding that you might want to consider as well. So you kind of look at all of those in the round and you say, okay, well, we've looked at a whole range of stuff here. Here's a preferred option. Actually, this is the way we think is the best way to construct the road. We think these are probably the guys to, this is the approach we're going to use to deliver it, and who we're going to get in to help us with that. This is how we're going to pay for it. This is when we're going to do it. And you're constructing logically a path through the options framework, and you can then say, if we're going to be a bit more ambitious, we can do a bit more. So you've looked at a wide range of options there. Well, we could just do it a bit quicker, or we can increase the scope. And if you want to be less ambitious, you can just decrease the scope or decrease the implementation time. So it just gives you a very systematic way of coming up with a short list that you can easily explain how you've got to it, which is part of the approach, really. You just need to be able to rationally say, this is why we think this is the best way forward.
And so do you run it in a workshop situation? Do you get all the key stakeholders in one place, in one room, and then slap it up on the wall? Or? Yeah,
it depends on the scale of it. So I'm working on a large IT investment with the NHS at the moment, and it's several workshops. It's not just one workshop. There are lots of discussions there, lots of subtleties. And you might only talk about scope in one of the workshops, or you might only talk about the funding solution. On the other end of the scale, I've done quite a few schools business cases, particularly in Wales, and yeah, that in that situation, you would definitely do it in one workshop. You would get the right people in the room, so probably representatives of the local authority, school service. You might have finance representatives. You might have officials who are plugged into the sort of user needs, if you like. So head teachers and teachers representatives, and you would talk through each of those elements of choice with those people in the room. And I always use a whiteboard, because you can actually just rub things out very quickly. Because what happens is you draw the grid on the whiteboard, and people change their mind as they go through, and as you sort of work through the different elements, they go back and say, well, actually, we don't think that's quite right now, so let's just tweak that. If you've done it on a whiteboard, you can just rub it out and alter it. So yeah, that's normally a couple of hours of discussion, and at the end of that, you can take a photograph of it, and then sort of transpose it into a document. And the important thing is actually sort of explaining why you've made the decisions you've made. So there's a narrative that should sit alongside it, which you kind of need to capture as you're going through. But yeah, it's a very, very useful tool. Whenever there are options at play and people need to consider different ways of doing things, it's a very useful tool to use.
And how do you say? So there's you talk through the 5 rows, but there's also 3 columns that do the minimum, the intermediate, and the maximum. How do you get the group to work out what is minimum and what is maximum, and therefore what is the middle bit?
So whenever you spend public money, and you say we're going to do something, you should always measure that against the status quo, i.e. the current situation, or realistically, you might actually have to spend money to maintain something. The realistic do minimum. So we're running 2 schools at the moment. We're proposing to build a super school and close those 2 schools. So you can cost how much you can set out how much it costs to run those 2 schools. You can look at the benefits and the risks, etc. And that's your benchmark then. So the do minimum on the options framework is basically what more could we do that just adds a little bit more to the to the status quo. So it might be you're thinking about building new schools to increase the capacity because you're running out of space. Well, you could just extend the existing school. You could refurbish it. That would be a realistic do minimum. At the other end of the scale, you knock the whole thing down and start again with a new build.
So maximum tends to be a really drastic maximum, or is that kind of in unlimited resources? Then this is what we could do, or is it these are the kind of resources we've got? This is the maximum we could get out of those resources, we think.
Yeah, well, that's a very good point, actually. And one thing I haven't explained is how you actually filter stuff onto the grid, if you like. So it's important before you start the exercise of using the options framework to set out very clearly what your spending objectives are. They should be in SMART terms, so that's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely. And they should think about as a sort of standardized list, really. And I guess it's, what are we trying to do in terms of improving economy, so reducing cost? What are we trying to do or achieve in terms of improving efficiency, doing more for less? What are we trying to do in terms of improving effectiveness? So that's the sort of quality of the service. Do we have to comply with any specific legislation? I can't remember what the 5th one is now, but there's a set of standard sort of headlines, if you like, for spending objectives. So the first task is to sort of articulate the outcomes, not the outputs, but the outcomes before you move on to working on the grid. So sticking with the schools example, you would say, we need to educate 400 under 11s every year in a particular region. You wouldn't say we need to build a new school because the old one's falling down, because that's an output. So it's about the outcome, and there are different options for achieving that output. One of those options is to just sort of rebuild what you've got or refurbish what you've got and extend maybe. Another option is to build a new school. So it's about being clear about what you want to achieve before you start the exercise. And when you're going through that exercise, you need to think about, what we describe as critical success factors. It's just another filter, if you like, and those are typically, does the option have strategic fit? Does the option offer value for money? Can we afford it? And is it deliverable? So it might be the best solution in the world, but if you've not got the money to pay for it, then you don't want to cost it, do you? If it's obviously, it's gold-plated taps and bells and whistles, then you don't want to do that either. So that's off the table. If it's not got strategic fit, then again, no point in doing it. You need to think about all of those things before they go onto the grid, and that's part of that broader discussion. And there's probably a workshop. I often use a workshop beforehand to tease those issues out.
So people come into the room kind of with that shared understanding already about what the objectives are, and then you crack on to the details.
Yes, exactly.
Once you've filled up the grid, you've got all your minimums, intermediates, and maximums in all the five rows.
Yeah.
You then color code them. What's that?
Okay, so what you want to do really is effectively you want to sort of reduce your workload. The whole purpose of the grid is to say we've looked at a whole load of stuff. That's your long list, and we've whittled that down to a realistic short list, and we're going to do some quite detailed analysis on that short list. So the color coding relates to whether how you kind of rank that option really. So if you think that's the preferred way forward, I'd color that green. If it's no go, if it's just actually it doesn't really have strong strategic fit, it's not affordable, it doesn't really achieve what we want to achieve, then color it red, because you're saying we've thought about it and it's off the table. If you think it's possibly a runner, then you color it yellow. And what you then do, so for example, implementation or the timing of delivery is a good example of this. You might look at something and say it's realistic to build this school in the next 2 years, but actually the minister wants us to build it within the next year. So we need to consider doing it quicker. Now, if you do it quicker, the risk increases, the costs potentially increase. And actually, going the other way, you can de-risk it and make it more affordable by doing it slower. So you might want to look at doing it slower as well. But the preferred way forward is to do it in 2 years, not 1 year or 3 years. So it just gives you a feel for what's still on the table. And when you've got that grid with the colours on it, you can then say, right, our short list of options is everything that's green. That's the preferred way. Then anything to the left of that, if there's a yellow to the left of it, an amber to the left of it, that constructs your less ambitious option. It's a variation of the preferred way forward. And anything to the right of that constructs your more ambitious option.
Okay, so so red you would always leave alone, yeah. but yellows are options, and that just shows you less ambitious and more ambitious. That's nice.
Yeah, it does work really well. And what I've found is that that final grid is a really useful tool to take to a program board or there's the key stakeholders and explain how you've got to where you've got to, and it helps people to think through the different elements of choice. And you often find that you end up tweaking it and changing it at that point, and that's fine. That's what it's for, really. You can still tell the story, but it gives you that very sort of concise illustration of where we are with it, and it gives you an opportunity to say to the board or the decision makers, look, this is the direction we're going in. Do you like that direction? Do you agree with that direction? Because if you do, we can do a lot more work to put some flesh on these bones. If it's completely wrong, actually you want an east-west road, not a north-south road, then let's go back to the drawing board. We'll do it again. But before we do any more work,
So it's all about ironing out those problems as early as possible before too much effort and too much waste goes into basically what would turn into waste later on.
Yes. Yeah, it is.
And so, and the green, red, yellow. Would you, as a group, if you're doing this in a workshop situation, would you always do that colouring as a group, or would you go away with your grid and say, right, these are what I think the colours are?
I would do it as a group. So as you go through each line, we'd say, right, okay, so generally it's easy to, the conversation starts with, okay, this is what we do at the moment. What does just doing a bit more look like? That's quite an easy question to answer. So the group answer that. And then you say, well, what do you really want? What do you think is the best way? What's the optimal solution? So that's quite easy. And then you say, well, okay, if you could do a bit more, what would that be? So that's generally how the discussion goes. And what you find is that people's preferred solution is often the sort of do maximum, and you end up sort of having a conversation about whether that really is the optimal solution potentially, and you end up with a more realistic solution in the middle. That's the preferred way forward, and the do maximum that they had in mind usually ends up as a carry forward. So it's a useful way to frame that discussion, really.
So that's a great point. So if the group is veering towards the do maximum, what do you do to try and bring them back to a kind of less ambitious option, or at least consider a less ambitious option? Are there any questions you use to unlock that?
Yeah, I think it's just that it's important that you can demonstrate that you've considered a wide range of options, and I think you need to sort of put yourself in the position of a reviewer. So if you're sat in a policy department, or perhaps in HM Treasury, and a business case hits your desk, you need to be able to say, well, okay, prove to me that doing a bit less isn't better value for money, or prove to me that you really need the bells and whistles that you say you need. So it's, when you frame it like that, because very often people say, but I don't want that on there because that's not the option that we want to deliver. And you say, well, okay, but you need to demonstrate why that's not deliverable, why that is not the best option. So it's important really that you can demonstrate that range from, not doing very much to doing a lot, and actually picking the most appropriate option in the middle.
I can see why the narrative that goes alongside it is important, because you want to be able to refer back to it. What do you normally run this with someone else? So you're the facilitator and then there's someone scribing, or how do you normally capture that?
Well, I've done it on my own many times. It's much more comfortable when you run it with somebody else. I think if you run it on your own, you kind of have to go straight back to your desk and write it up immediately, because you lose a lot of the detail otherwise.
Well, I guess you could record it, couldn't you? I mean,
yeah, I guess you could actually. Yeah.
One of the important questions on Workshop Bank is there any kind of secret sauce about a tool that only someone who's run a tool so many times really gets to know? Are there any kind of bear traps that people, if they're picking this up and running it for the first time, they really need to be careful to try and avoid, and a way out of those?
It's right. Okay. I mean, that's an interesting question. I think it's a very simple, straightforward tool to use, but you need, as a facilitator, you need to ensure that you understand the end point that you're trying to get to. You don't necessarily have to be an expert in the particular policy area or topic area, but you really do need the right people in the room. Okay. If you've not got the right people in the room, you will not get the right results. You need people who can give you a really sort of informed view. So if you're talking about a school again, yes, we need a school for 400 pupils, or the range is 200, 300, 400. If you've not got people in the room that understand that is the range, then you're not going to get the right answer. So it very much depends on the people that you select for the exercise. And I would suggest that you really don't want any more than about 6 or 7 people. Any more than that, then it's too difficult. You can't do these things by committee. It's a touchy-feely, what do people generally think is the right answer, and it's a sort of gut feeling thing, and you'd be surprised at how right that is, really. People have a gut feeling about something, and if the group has a collective gut feeling, it's usually the right answer. Or is going to lead to the right answer. So it's kind of sort of bridges. Well, I think it's a very logical way to do it, but it kind of bridges that sort of science and art thing, really. You know, it's not just guessing blindly, but it's putting a bit of structure around that and giving people the opportunity to be creative as well.
Yeah, no, I can see that. And like I'd imagine if you don't get the right people in the room, then whatever this map, whatever the grid looks like at the end, isn't going to mean anything in front of the people who are going to take the final decision because the wrong people were involved in creating it in the first place.
That's true. And the other pitfall is to try and go down into too much detail too early. So we use the options framework for a number of purposes. We use it at the strategic level, and you have to keep that very high level. We use it at the program level. So, for example, in the service solution line, you'd be looking at the potential project options. So, you know, is it these 2 schools, is it these 3 schools, or is it these 5 schools? You know, what's the solution at the program level? And then at the project level, it's, you know, is it this sort of building, or this sort of building? So it very much depends on the level at which you're using the tool as well, and you need to use it appropriately. So if you get that bit wrong, you're going to get the wrong answer as well, and it's going to confuse people.